So while I was wondering what to do for today's video, I remembered that when I did my little rant on why we don't have a live-action Wonder Woman movie the other day, I mentioned that I didn't really care for the 2009 animated Wonder Woman movie, and I thought, you know what, I haven't seen it in a long while, so maybe my thoughts have changed, and even if my thoughts have not changed, anyone who watched my Wonder Woman rant deserves to hear why I don't like this movie, since I teased that in the rant. So here I am delivering one of the longer reviews I've done in a while, I think. This movie is directed by Lauren Montgomery, with the overall story by well-known DC Comics writer Gail Simone, and the overall script by Michael Jelenic. This movie stars Keri Russell as Wonder Woman, Nathan Fillion as Steve Trevor, and Alfred Molina as Ares. So I've never been a big fan of Wonder Woman in general. I've only ever read 2 of her solo stories, and I liked both of them more than I ever thought I would. Who knows, maybe someday you'll get to hear my thoughts on those stories. But my experiences with Wonder Woman come from her time spent with the JLA in the mid-90s to early 2000s, and the various Justice League cartoons and movies. And I just never could dig her. And I'm sure someone who is a huge Wonder Woman fan is thinking that I'm an uncultured sexist who just can't stand for some estrogen to get mixed in with my superhero escapist fiction. And that's just not true. My all-time favorite X-Man is Storm. I also really like characters like Barbara Gordon and Cassie Kane from the Batman comics. My current favorite ongoing series, The Sixth Gun, is headlined by Becky Moncrief, who is a woman. So it's not that I don't like women, it's that I don't like this woman. Or at least, most of the time I don't. I did like the Linda Carter version of Diana that I saw in the pilot episode of the live-action television series. In fact, that's probably the one thing I liked about the live-action series. Carter brought a sense of naivete and innocence to the role that I had never seen in the Justice League comics or in the cartoons. I saw this same sense of naivete in the first volume of the George Perez run from the 1980s. Now, I'm not saying that all women have to be naive and innocent in order for me to like them as characters, because Storm is certainly not that, neither of the Batgirls that I like are like that, and while Becky Moncrief starts out that way, she doesn't stay that way for long. I think it's just that Wonder Woman, in addition to being arrogant and bossy, has built her whole ideology on pretty shaky ground. Now, once again, I bet some of you are thinking that I'm a sexist and that I should be stoned and burned at the stake. No, 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 no. I am absolutely 1,000,000,000% for total equality between the genders and the races and everything else. But far, far too often, and this is where I start to complain about the movie and not just about Wonder Woman in general, we see Wonder Woman saying something like, "Harumph! Typical man. If a woman had done this, then everything would be fine and we wouldn't have this problem in the first place." And this is where I take issue with the character of Wonder Woman. When a lady, any lady, gets all high and mighty and says that all the problems in the world come from men, I fail to see how this is any better than if a man takes an extra dose of stupidity and says that all women should be submissive and make men a sandwich. Both of these ideologies are so profoundly based and dumb that every time I even get near a Wonder Woman story, my blood boils because that's what Wonder Woman is all about. Never mind the immediate sense of hypocrisy where Wonder Woman continues to work with a dude despite decrying him as the worst thing since the invention of the camera, or how in the comics she works with a team full of dudes who mostly aren't guilty of stepping on women. Guy Gardner might qualify for that, but Batman, Superman, Martian Manhunter, do these guys really deserve the waves of animosity that come from Diana when she gets in one of her rants about how men are evil? This is one of those things where I see why she acts this way even though I don't agree with it. The why is basically because that's exactly what William Moulton Marston believed in. WMM, for those of you who don't know, is the dude who created Wonder Woman as well as the lie detector. Anyway, he created Wonder Woman because there was a specific lack of female superheroes in the 1940s. I think there was one actually before Wonder Woman. Creating more female superheroes to offset the overwhelming population of male superheroes, yeah, absolutely, no problem. This diversifies things and makes things more interesting for writers who are trying to tell stories with these characters because the characters they are dealing with are vastly different and provide more opportunities for different kinds of stories that way. but William Moulton Marston, from what I understand, believed that the whole world would be a better place if men all just took a step back and if women took over everything. Now let's ignore the fact that since Marston's days of writing Wonder Woman, we've had people like Margaret Thatcher, Sarah Palin, and Hillary Clinton who, regardless of your political views, have had high leadership positions in various governments that are pretty huge and important. And since Thatcher was Prime Minister in the 1980s, the world's problems did not just go away, did they? Of course not, because this whole philosophy is ridiculous. And yet, even when Wonder Woman gets rebooted or is used for a new story set in the present day, with none of the baggage of 70 years of comics that started off with this philosophy built into this world, the philosophy, while unspoken, still permeates the character and her world. And let me go ahead and say that the idea that men are abusive and domineering and try to control everything, there is a grain of truth to that. At least there's a grain of truth to some of that. Some men are like that. We still live in a world where rape, spousal abuse, and unequal salaries still persist, and that is awful. But to group every single man in the world into this "you're all pigs and should be beaten for your behavior" mentality is just as bad as grouping any group of people all into one blanket statement that only applies to a few of them. Now, we do at least get a discussion of this sort of thing in this movie, but it's never taken very seriously, I don't think. We have Steve Trevor, who tries to say that men aren't really all that bad, yet on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most piggish and sexist a man can be, Steve is like a 7 or an 8, which just puts every defense that he puts forth regarding men into question. And then you've got Diana, who at the very least tells Ares that she's come to know that men aren't really all that bad, but I can't really take her seriously either, because she's only come to know one dude really well, and he tried to get her drunk so that he could do the below-the-belt version of a high five with their groins. And then at the very end of the movie, she only mocks Steve's attempt at trying to be a gentleman, so I'm very certain that this discussion of Diana's worldviews and Steve's worldviews isn't even played seriously at all. It really feels like it's just there to say, look, these two characters have character arcs, even though absolutely nothing in this movie suggests that they actually do go through any kind of arc. Now, everything I just complained about, I'd call that the actual cake of this movie. Then there's the frosting, which I have several problems with. Some of these things are not all that big of a deal, and some of them are huge, and at the end of the day, I feel like the plot of this movie has enough holes to sink an entire freighter. But before I get to the holes, let me talk about Nathan Fillion. He's a fantastic actor. I loved him in Firefly and Serenity. The problem for me is that Nathan Fillion is Malcolm Reynolds. If I had somehow seen this movie before watching Firefly, or even knowing what it was, I'd have been perfectly fine with Fillion as Steve Trevor. But the problem I have here is a problem I had on Green Lantern Emerald Knights. When I hear Fillion, I hear Mal Reynolds. This is not a fault with the movie, but rather a fault with me. But I suspect that if I have this problem, someone else out there might have it as well. Nothing really to be done about it either. I wouldn't want Fillion to be out of work just because some schmo can't unsee or unhear him as Mal Reynolds. Still, I thought it was worth mentioning. So starting at the beginning of the movie and moving forward, here are my gripes about this movie that are more or less surface details, but still worth mentioning. Number 1. Hera gives the Amazons an island to shield them from the air quotes chaotic world. Movie's words, not mine. But did they really need shielding? I get that this movie later addresses this when at least 3 characters, Alexa, Persephone, and Steve, say that hiding from the world was a bad idea, but none of them actually question the reason for hiding, which is completely stupid and virtually non-existent. These warrior chicks really needed to be shielded from the rest of the world? I don't know, they seem pretty good at taking care of themselves to me. Number 2, why does touching the magic liquid mirror thing make the island visible? This thing was a gift from Hephaestus, one of the gods, yes? And at least one of the gods gave them the island to hide them from the rest of the world. So why give them this thing that makes hiding nearly impossible, since everyone in the universe can see the island when this thing is touched? The real reason touching this thing reveals the island to outsiders is because this movie has a case of the plot needs to happen in a certain way-itis. Number 3. Why does Persephone wait until now to release Ares? Again, I get that it's because the plot needs to happen in a certain way, but does it really make any sense in story that it happens literally minutes after Diana is selected to go to man's world? There's convenient, and then there's, holy cow, that's one of the most contrived things I've ever seen in a movie or story, which this happens to be. Number 4. This is something I've always hated about every version of the Wonder Woman story, and while it's not as glaring a problem as most of the other things I've mentioned, it's glaring enough that it deserves to be mentioned. I find it laughable that Diana is participating in this tournament to decide who will escort Steve Trevor to man's world, and Hippolyta does not recognize her. If it was my mother and I was fighting in a tournament, she would instantly know that I was out there, mask or no mask. Add to this fact that while we don't know the exact year that Diana was created, I kinda took it that she was created shortly after the Amazons went into hiding. So Diana is over 1,000 years old, right? Her mother, and really any of the people watching and participating in this tournament, should have been able to instantly recognize her fighting style after getting to know her for 1,000 years, right? Number 5. When Diana and Steve arrive in man's world, they've got a mission to stop one of the biggest threats the world has ever seen from destroying all life on the planet, and, as we find out later, conquering the gods who don't live on the planet. So this is a pretty big deal, right? So as soon as they land in America, Steve is gonna immediately call his superiors, show them that Wonder Woman can lift a car or something, and they'll almost certainly listen to him when he says that this lady is from a hidden island that they probably saw show up on their radars twice when the magic mirror stopped covering it briefly. Then he will have not only a superpowered woman who can fight off giant snake-bearded warriors and the god of war himself, but the entirety of the U.S. Armed Forces. Oh wait, that's not what Steve does? They just land and quietly go look at some computers without telling anyone what they are doing, and then they try to handle this thing by themselves? When Wonder Woman knows that Ares has an entire cult at his command and they are just 2 people? She doesn't know that almost all of her sisters are coming to help out later. So how stupid are these characters? Once again, I can see why the people making this movie did this. They want to have Diana and Steve spend some time together, and putting an entire army and government in there to help them stop Ares would just get in the way of that. I get it. But at least come up with something that logically explains why these characters are not asking for backup. Maybe throw in a quick throwaway line that Steve did ask for help, and his superiors thought he was nuts and tried to suspend him. Something like that, so that we can at least see that some of these guys aren't some of the least forward-thinking characters in cinematic history. Number 6. This movie has something in common with about 97% of all superhero movies, and that is that it tries to shove a barely developed love story into this thing without first making me care about either of the characters involved in this story. While Steve is a good soldier, as a human being, I really don't like him. He admits to all of his faults, which is something admirable, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he is a sleazy pig, which Diana knows, and she still falls for him in return. What? Why does she fall in love with him? Because he saved her life? You know what this air quotes romance reminds me of? The relationship between Dana Barrett and Peter Venkman from Ghostbusters, where the dude is relentless in trying to get in the pants of the woman shows virtually no interest until the very end, where it almost feels like she is letting him kiss her just to get him to stop trying so hard, and not because of any real interest in him. Yeah, that's exactly what this romance feels like. I'm almost willing to let this slide because, like I said, almost every single superhero movie ever made has a really dumb romance plot that is handled poorly and is usually just thrown in because that is part of the established formula, and it's easier to just run with the formula that is flawed than to forge something new that might be better. Number 7. Here is where we start treading into the completely insane plot developments. Ares plans to nuke Themyscira. Okay, that sounds good. We see briefly that there are still some ladies there, and we know that Ares wants basically everyone on Earth dead, so this fits in with his dastardly schemes. But then he says that one nuke, when detonated, gives him the power of 1,000 wars. What? Any given war would yield something like 1,000 deaths, like when the immigrants first came to what would eventually become America and warred with the natives, or 57,000 deaths, which was a number I quickly Googled for the Vietnam War casualties. And we don't ever get to see all of the ladies on Themyscira, but I can't imagine that there's more than 300 of them. Most of the Amazons were killed at the beginning when warring with Ares, right? And then in the present day, most of the ones who are still alive are in America fighting Ares and his forces along with Steve and Diana. So let's say that 2/3 of their entire population left the island to assist Diana and Steve in fighting Ares. That leaves roughly 100 people on the island, and if the nuke does go off, then that will give Ares 1,000 times the power of any given war? Yeah, that's stupid. But again, I see why they did this. This whole movie feels a lot like a video game to me. Not saying it's exactly like a video game. Even the stuff I hate about this movie, it does do more in the way of story and character development than any video game I've ever played. But I see Deimos, or Snakebeard as I like to call him, as little more than a mini-boss. You fought a few characters who were very easy to defeat, and then blammo, time for a harder character who works for the even harder character. You kill him, then it's time for the big final boss battle, which is Ares. And then he digivolves into something that looks kind of the same, but with horns and spikes and stuff. Yeah, this is a lot like a video game. But even though I see why they did this whole thing with the nuke, it's still dumb. Number 8. Last nitpick I have here. At one point, Ares raises all of the Amazons who have ever died back from the dead to fight the living Amazons, and Artemis gets to fight Alexa. These two have never really liked each other. Artemis is a warrior and Alexa is a poet/scholar, so even though Alexa is now under Ares' thrall and is about to kill Artemis, she is able to utter the spell that Artemis has to utter to free the zombie Amazons from Ares' control. But what's so special about Alexa? I know that she reads books and quotes from books in literally every scene that we see her in, but I like books, and if Ares took control of my mind, I'm pretty sure that would not protect me from his mind control, would it? Overall, I still don't like this movie. I went into it hoping that I would like it more than I did before because that has happened in the past with stuff I did not like. But ultimately, there is so much more in this movie that I hate and disagree with and cannot get behind compared to most things that I review. While I don't think this is an abhorrent piece of cinema, it's definitely not great or even good. I think if I was feeling generous, I'd clock this in at okay. And that's a shame because I want to see more animated movies that don't feature Superman and Batman as much as I like those characters. I'm not sure if there was some movie that tanked so hard that DC retreated away from doing non-Superman Batman movies. Sure, we've gotten some Justice League movies, but all of those heavily feature Batman and Superman. The only ones we've seen that are not centered on those two are 2 Green Lantern films and this Wonder Woman film. I'm really not sure if there were other people who did not like this movie, but it seems like I'm in the minority here and that most people really did like it. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has 86% out of 100, and on Internet Movie Database, it has 7.2 stars out of 10. Maybe there's something deeper that explains why this represents a third of the non-Superman Batman films. I hope not. I'd really like to see some more variety in these animated movies. Just, not sucky movies. So that's my thoughts, guys. I hope I didn't anger you or bore you or anything like that. I hope this video was helpful to you, and if it was, then I hope you will indulge me with a like, a share, a comment, and a push of the subscribe button. And I will be back tomorrow for another kind of video. So until then, be safe and have a great day. Catch you later.